Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to another episode of Role Models, Juicy Conversations with Beautiful Humans. I'm Jennifer Norman, founder of the Human Beauty Movement and your host. This podcast thrives on your support, so if you like what you hear, follow us, rate and review us, and share this episode with everyone you know across your networks. Okay, now, the Human Beauty Movement is all about radical self-love, radical self-acceptance, and radical self-expression. So that means that we intentionally step outside our comfort zone to discuss and provide understanding on topics that may otherwise be perceived as taboo. So today we are doing it. We are going to talk about erotic power. After all, this is a shame-free environment. So strap on your strap on to guide our discussion. We're going down under, pun intended, to welcome Ilsa Fay to the role model stage.
Oh, thank you.
Hailing from Melbourne, Ilsa is an award-winning filmmaker, creative director, and founder of Erotica Film Festival. She is also a business coach who works with women on financial empowerment. Welcome, Ilsa. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's it's an absolute pleasure, Jennifer.
Wonderful. First, I would love to learn about how you came to do what you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So, there's a few different pathways and journeys I could share with you about how I got here, because our lives are, infused with all these different moments and people and experiences and situations that lead us to the places that we're at. But I feel like the most relevant one, to talk about the Erotica Film Festival and how I've ended up here is to do with my journey as a mum and to do with my journey around sexuality. And I think that as women, and not all women, but a lot of women do grow up in environments and in situations where we repress and are shamed for our sexuality and our power. And so we can sometimes struggle to really embody and accept and confidently express those parts of ourselves. So that was part of my journey through teenagehood and early adulthood. And I guess the point where I'm at now came from being a mum. And it was a few years ago, I was doing a self-pleasure ritual. And in that ritual, I had a vision about something that I wanted to create in the world. And I came out of that experience and I said to my partner at the time, this is what I want to create. It's like this incredible erotic vision being. And I said, I can't do that. It is too crazy. It is too out there. This is absolutely radical, insane. And he turned to me and he said, of course you can do it. You can do whatever you want. I've got your back. I'm here to support you. And so in that process of beginning to launch and create erotic events from a position of celebration and acceptance, as opposed to creating sexy events where people like do sexy things, it wasn't really ever about, came through all of these fears and frustrations around how I would be perceived as a mum, as a woman, as somebody who was a valuable member of society and community and so on and so forth. And in the seeding of the erotica events, because they started off as live performance art experiences, I did actually have to journey being censored, being, I guess, put down and trying to be squashed because of what it was that I was doing. And through that seeding of erotica, I had this beautiful photo montage created by a friend and colleague of ethical erotic photography. And I was watching it because it was something I was going to play at the event. And my son, who was, only about 10 at the time, or 10 or 11, came past and said, "Oh, Mum, what are you looking at? Can I watch that?" My first response was like, oh my gosh, no, there's breasts on this screen. Absolutely not. And I took a moment to actually really think and reflect into that and to think about what I value around art and what I value around beauty and what I value around ethical photography and beauty and consent and the body. And I realized that everything that I was looking at was not explicit and was actually first seeded through the gaze of art. And so I decided that actually it was okay. And so I allowed him to look, and he just kind of looked and was like, oh, okay. And off he went. It was not a big deal. It was just like, oh, okay, cool. And off he went. And so that really was part of this journey of realizing that I had a responsibility as a mum and as a woman in my community to do something about the issues that I was seeing in the world, particularly around sexuality. And so, 10s turn into 13s, turn into 16-year-olds, and then you start to enter into the world of pornography. And I had concerns about what my child was maybe one day going to see in the schoolyard. And And I needed to do something about that. Maybe not specifically for him, but for the collective community of children, about, what they were going to then grow into and grow up with, and what they were going to consume in the schoolyard, looking at iPhones in secret, and really wanting to be part of a world where sexuality and eroticism was not aggressive, was not full of assault and degradation and demeaning behaviors and language, and wanting to create an environment and a situation where intimacy and sex and love could be seen through the gaze of care and connection. So that's how I got here.
Amazing, amazing. So I would love for you to help dispel some more myths about erotica. You did touch on the fact that there is this difference between erotica and art and porn, and thinking about what society has essentially been emblazoning in front of our children and in front of, everybody who's willing to view. Like, what is the biggest difference, or what are some myths that people have about erotica as soon as they hear it?
Well, I think that the cultural movement, and it's been a really important movement that porn has brought to the world, actually, because what it's created is the permission for people to explore their fantasies. There is no fantasy that you cannot go and find online, no matter how much we might feel like that's ugly or uncomfortable. Porn has been a trailblazer in many, many ways for many, many people. But I think that, and porn is also changing, right? So it's that we've got the mainstream gaze over it, but it's also being changed by women like me, by trans folk, by queer folk, by other people who want to create and experience something different. So I think one of the myths is that porn is only one particular section of the market, of the sexuality market, and that is changing. And I think the reason why erotica is so important is because we're bringing consent, we're bringing the consent of the body, right? So when you're working with sexuality, when you look at something like contractual agreement, if you're an artist or a performer, you can be over 18 or whatever the legal age of consent is in your country and say, yes, I agree to do X, Y, and Z. They are within my boundaries that I agree to do. And then you have the consent of the body. And the consent of the body is something very different, because you can't sign an agreement that says my body consents, because you might get into an experience or a situation with a person that you think is good, that you think is fine. And then you get there, and if you're sensitized, your body might contract just a little bit. And that's enough to recognize that your body is actually not consenting to that act. And it might not be that it's not consenting ever, it's just not consenting right now. Or it could be not ever. So I think that when we're looking at erotica, and in particular the films that we bring into the Erotica Film Festival, what we're really seeking and looking for is the consent of the body inside the experience. So that's why so many of our films are made by regular people who have a desire to express themselves. Often it's just an expression of themselves, not with another person. We're not purely an explicit film festival, so our primary gaze is on sensuality and intimacy. So I think bringing through consent and bringing through art are really important elements to start to change the narratives around porn and the way that people use porn, because it has been so destructive and because it can be so addictive and so harmful to people's experiences of themselves and of their sex lives. We really want to start to see porn being infused from the gaze of art and beauty.
I think I understand, but I want to take it a little bit further, because I think that a lot of people would say, well, with porn, there's actors and certainly they're consenting, otherwise it wouldn't be out there. So
Yes.
what then really would be the difference? Because it's not rape. Like, rape is not consensual. And I think everybody would agree on that. That is a hard line, but there still seems to be this fuzziness between where the line is of where porn begins and ends, and then where erotica begins and ends. Or is it not to be, maybe it's more subjective? Maybe it is something that's more fluid.
Yeah, sure. And I hear what you're saying. I don't think that there is a specific line between porn and erotica. I mean, porn is erotic and erotica can also be porn. And I think dispelling the taboo nature of the word porn is very important, because it creates a broader gaze and possibility to receive more forms of sexuality and more forms of communication and interest and fantasy. And it dispels, I guess, the ugliness and the rejectionary nature that we have over sexuality. So I think that part's important. But the piece that I'm really speaking to around consent of the body doesn't mean that people are being raped. It doesn't mean that at all, right? That's a totally another conversation. What we're talking about is, if I was to meet you in person, and sometimes, you have this connection with somebody, you're like, oh, you're just going to hug them, right? There's a straightaway recognition of the bodies that it feels good and safe and exciting to come together. And sometimes you meet somebody and you're like, I actually don't want to hug this person. Maybe I'm okay with a handshake. Maybe I'm okay okay just with a wave, right? These are things that we teach our children. Would you like a hug, a handshake, or a high five, or a wave?
Mhm.
They're really good ways to teach consent. And these principles have to remain through adulthood, and in particular through erotic content. Just because I have said to somebody, well, yes, I agree to do this sex act with you on paper, on the day, my body might just be an absolute no. Like, I just do not want to do this. I don't like your energy, or I don't feel very good today. I don't feel safe. I don't feel emotionally well. I don't feel well slept. Whatever reason it might be, to then not actually be wanting to or willing to engage in that act. So that's really, it's a nuance, and it can't be measured because it's different to each and every single person in each and every single moment.
Yeah. So whereas you were before a bit concerned about what your son or what any child might be consuming on the on the playground, or what they might be looking at on their own time, then how would you be able to instruct your child or others to be able to have that discernment, or to know whether or not what they're looking at is art and whether or not it's not necessarily so?
I mean, this is a question for each parent to answer for themselves. I think ultimately we all come to the table as adults and parents with very different value sets. And these sorts of conversations around sex and sexuality and consent start when children are tiny, like not forcing them to hug grandparents, not forcing them to hug you. I think one of the biggest myths around being a parent is that our children are obliged to hug us and to love us, and that we are owed that in some way because we have birthed our children or created or taken care of them. And it's not true. Our children are sovereign beings, and they get to choose also in each and every moment whether they want to hug you or say I love you, or follow instructions and things like that. So seeding this sort of appreciation for the consent of the body, not just their body but also your own body as a parent, saying things like, hey, I'm actually feeling really mad about something right now, and I love you. I don't really want to hug right now. I need some space. Being able to teach children these sorts of languages, and where affection or loving a touch isn't necessarily representative of them being rejected, but actually is a healthy measure of, emotional health and intelligence inside the household, is deeply important for them to navigate their own sense of self, but also how they then start to navigate their relationships in friendships and other further intimate relationships as they turn into adults. And then, having that level of self-understanding, emotional intelligence, the capacity for compassion and empathy can only be a good thing for then how they start to engage with and use erotic and sexual content.
I think that is so powerful, because I can totally see how in many cases with parenting, there is such a desire to control the environment, control what they're watching, try, keep things away from them. But kids are smart. Kids know they'll go around it somehow. So if you don't have those conversations overtly to say, this is what you're viewing, this is how you can look at it, and this is the way that I would instruct you to, think about things, and trust your feelings and set up those boundaries or those delineations where you feel most comfortable to do so. Because otherwise people are like, oh, I don't want to hurt that person's feelings, I better give them a hug. Or I don't want to hurt that dude's feelings, I better, it could carry on to a lot of different intimate areas of the life without you even realizing it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Amazing.
It is amazing. And I think so many people, at least probably in our age group, have had experiences where we have done things with people in our teenage years that upon reflection in our adulthood, there's no way we would have done that with the knowledge and the self-certainty that we experience now. And that's the sense of value. It's that we now deeply value ourselves and our own boundaries more than the feeling of or the experience of being bullied, rejected, shamed, whatever it might be, by whoever. And so seeding that from a very young age, that their value is higher than any of those other things, creates a really powerful, I guess, essence and vibration in the schoolyard. Like if they're willing to stand for themselves, then they're probably willing to stand for others as well. And that's a powerful thing to bring through.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the idea of sensuality and power. We talk about the sacral and the solar plexus chakras, and the two of them are, of course, very close to each other. I would love for you to give everybody just a little bit of a 101 on that.
Great. I love chakras. So the sacral sits in the womb space, whether you have a womb or not, regardless of your gender. That is the location inside of the body that center sits. And it generally holds themes around creativity, sexuality, tribe, belonging, community, and those sorts of themes. Then we have the power center, and that sits in the solar plexus. And those themes are generally related to more masculine themes of will, power, fire, so on and so forth. So what you're really looking at is the sacral, which is more of a feminine center, and then you've got the solar plexus, which is more of a masculine center. And for me, I feel like the integration of those two pieces is what brings through the integration of humanity, right? And it will come up then into the heart. So you bring the feminine with the masculine up into the heart, and you have integration, right? It's beautiful the way that all of these ancient systems work, and I'm certainly no expert on it. But the integration of sensuality and personal power, right? Will being the seat of personal power, brings through levels of confidence, levels of high self-worth, the ability to make change in the world, the ability to stand for things that are important. And I think what it does when people really start to get this piece and integrate it in their own life is it starts to dispel the distortions that we see around sexuality and power. So some of the ways that distorted sexuality and power can play out in many, many different ways, including the more aggressive tones that you see in some people, the more submissive tones that you see in other people sexually, but it can also play out in non-sexual ways. People who feel disempowered sexually can become aggressive or overly submissive in very regular scenarios in the workplace, for instance, because they don't have an integration of their worth and of their personal power. And that, we can start to see things like passive aggression, overt bullying, lots of different manipulations and aggressions that start to come out when these two power centers are not really well integrated. The place that I see it is also in parenting, when people aren't satisfied in their sexual intimate relationships, they can outsource their love needs to children or to their parents, or to all sorts of very weird and wonderful or not so wonderful ways.
Interesting. So, certainly some people are very confident in the business, as you had mentioned, but not necessarily in their bodies. And because there is this disintegration, there is this sense of an imbalance in many different ways. So what are some of the things that people can do to help synergize these? Of course, awareness, I think, is the first thing. As you said, if you sense that you're manipulative, or if you sense passive aggressive nature, if you sense that there's something going on, it's like, okay, there's an imbalance here, but how do I fix this? What do I do about it?
This is the question, isn't it? If you don't even have awareness to begin with, well, there's very little that can be done. And if you're somebody who is experiencing, actually, this is a great way to describe it. If you're somebody who experiences a lot of drama, or if you constantly feel like people are doing things to you, like you're feeling victimized, or you're feeling bullied, or there's being manipulated, if you feel like that's happening to you a lot, then chances are that there's something that's distorted. There's something that's out of balance. Now, it doesn't mean that it's your fault. What it means is that there's something there to pay attention to because you're not fully in your power. That's what that means, right? So anywhere there's drama, distortion, frustration, anger, upset, there's usually a power imbalance going on. And those sorts of situations are designed to present the possibility of power returning to an equilibrium effectively. Like anger is a state of being that attempts to bring back a state of equilibrium. So if you're a person who's on the other end of the spectrum, who's highly aggressive, who is always feeling like it's everybody else's fault, and you're, kind of always manipulating places and situations around you, chances are you'll probably also feel like a victim, but in a totally different way. There will be a sense of self-righteousness, entitlement, lots of states spent in anger and things like that. And that's also a sign that there's a lack of self-awareness around the power imbalances internally. So ways to, I guess, to resolve that. If you don't have awareness, there's not much to do, yes. But if you do have some threads of awareness, then, a really great place to start is to just keep coming back to the body. There's lots of breath work, there's lots of meditation practices, there's lots of very simple tools that can really deeply support people. Journaling, seeking support with therapy, retreat spaces, workshops, all of these tools that we have so widely available to us in modern culture are fantastic tools for that journey. That's why they're here. That's why we're so excited about them. Listening to podcasts like yours is such a great opportunity to bring through different sense of awarenesses from different speakers that can support mini awakenings and revelations within yourself to start to support healing or integration. So there's so many different avenues, but ultimately when we're dealing with power imbalances, the only person who can ever do that work and bring it back to wholeness is you.
And I think that one piece of awareness is, do you really truly feel happy? Do you really feel truly content with yourself? Are you really feeling joy in your life? Or when you start feeling that victim complex, or if you feel that you're being bullied, or otherwise, if you feel that people are intimidated by you and shunning you, and there's that power imbalance that way, then those are cues. Those are absolute cues. And I guess this also does beg the next question, because obviously living out your fantasies and thinking about erotica, some parts of fetishism talk about submissiveness and dominance. And so if somebody feels that they're getting aroused or turned on by being a submissive, and then they find a dominant player who is willing and consensual, is that then harmonious from an external perspective? The vice versa, if somebody is is dominant and finds submissiveness in somebody else, and then they come together, is that something that helps to create coherence? Or is that person really trying to look for something where it's a little bit more balanced by themselves rather than seeking it from somebody else?
That's a great question. And my views and perspectives on that particular scenario have actually radically changed over time as I have matured as a person. I think fundamentally the external gaze on somebody's personal experience is completely irrelevant. We are living our personal experiences, and my opinion or that of any other person's is completely irrelevant to somebody's personal journey, ultimately. So there's that piece. You live the experience that you need to live. And I think that potentially some guiding forces and factors would be, irregardless of the situation or the experience or the fetish that you find yourself in, do you continue to feel empowered to change that at any time? If you feel like you don't have that capacity, then something needs to happen. But if you always feel like you can have a conversation, change, leave, negotiate, then enjoy your life. Have a great time, whatever you're doing. However, I have also considered that as people are playing out these roles and fantasies, I have considered that they loop. You do see some people who have a particular fetish who loop and who remain stuck inside of that fetish forever. And I don't know that as humans we are designed to sit in loops. I think that we are designed to evolve. And so I have wondered whether fetishes, when they actually become fully integrated, whether they're actually parts of self that are externalized and we play out the experience until it can come into a place of wholeness. And then as it comes into a place of wholeness, potentially there's another exciting fetish or desire that arises that then we want to play that out. And so it's almost like a healing journey, so to speak, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's been trauma. It can just be these are parts of the human soul that we are just integrating in this particular lifetime for no other reason other than this is just what we've been given, right? So I have considered that. And, I know my personal journey through sexuality, my desires and my fantasies have changed a great deal. And I think that one of the reasons why, for me, I have never looped is because I've been with my partner now for 8 years, and we have journeyed those things together in a very honest, consensual, high communication space around how we feel, what we want, what we don't like, where we're at, over a long period of time. And we have both been willing to evolve. And I think sometimes one person can be ready to evolve, but they're not ready to leave. They don't want to sacrifice the person that they're with in order to evolve past that if that person is looping. So it's complex human behavior, human relationships. Many people are not willing to sacrifice relationships for their own personal soul journey. And I think that the people who are willing to sacrifice personal relationships for their soul journey are going to have a more satisfying, overall enriched experience of their life.
Oh, very well said. I have never heard it said in that way before. And I think that is so enlightening. And I think that you're exactly right. I mean, certainly we are not here to fix anybody. This is not what this is. It's really like, are you listening and reflecting upon these words? And if you're sensing that there is something about it that perhaps in your behavior, you're feeling a compulsion where, you can't just easily walk away from it, then you might be getting into that loop. You might be getting into an addictive behavior, which is not necessarily the healthiest for you, potentially, but explore it for yourself. These are just suggestions and thoughts to help us all back on the journey to ourselves as it is. So
Yeah.
Certainly. Now, Ilsa, I know you coach women mostly, and the fascinating thing that I found was that you have them get in touch with their masculine energy. And I would have never have thought about that for business, but I would love for you to speak about that.
Yeah, so I've been through, my personal journey has been to come through the feminine mystic arts. I came through the sacred sexuality journey. I came through the female feminine empowerment journey and lived and breathed in that conscious space for quite a period of time. And it's beautiful and it's incredible. And there's lots of self-pleasure and self-love and creativity and art, and not a lot of the ability to self-provide or
Bing.
to fully
There
to
you
fully
go.
create the life of your dreams. That space is hanging out with people who don't have a lot of money in beautiful spaces drinking chai. you know, and it's overrun with a particular demographic of younger people, right? Because as you start to get older, then you have more responsibilities or children or financial commitments. And so we're forced into roles and positions and situations that can actually provide us a financial income, right? So that's kind of what happens there. But what I saw was that so many women, myself included, wanted this new experience of feminine mysticism and empowerment to be the way that we lived our life forever. We didn't want it to be visiting a retreat on the weekend and then going back to our day job. That's not the integration that so many people want. They want it to be completely integrated. We as the younger kind of generation these days, we want to be able to travel. We want to be able to work from anywhere in the world. We want to be able to have, incredible, amazing incomes, very minimal responsibilities. And sitting around in women's circles talking about our feelings is not always conducive to having that sort of lifestyle, right? So part of the pathway that I've been on is to mature the feminine. And I've had an incredible mentor who's supported me with that. And what that means is to go from the immature feminine who's like all in her feelings. It's like, I've got all these feelings and you need to listen to me and I'm Kali embodied, right? So it's kind of to go from that, the goddess complex, into the mature feminine who can still feel everything, but it's not actually about her. It's controlled. It's the inner experience of chaos from a place of pure creation. And that level of maturity requires the masculine to be on board inside of the system, because the masculine is the provider. He creates structure. He creates consistency. He protects the value of the feminine. He doesn't need to do all of this business, because he's like, these are my boundaries. And I don't need to scream at you that I'm the goddess incarnated, because these are my boundaries. And you either meet these boundaries or you don't. And if you don't meet them, there's no drama. We're just not a match. It becomes very simple.
I think that that is a really wonderful way of looking at it, because in life, and if we think about evolutionary time, and we are in a time of extraordinary ascension, it's accelerating so dramatically, where roles and responsibilities are shifting, and it does require, women to take on masculine energy and, either externally or internally, so that we can provide for ourselves if that is our calling, if that's what really makes us feel alight and our hearts sing. And so from the perspective of support, or from the perspective of embodying it and getting a coach such as yourself to help light that way, it's a very powerful thing. And it will help with that integration of the two chakras of the sacral and the solar plexus. And so that you can essentially be whole and balanced in wellness to go then forth and live the life that you wish to manifest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having the masculine qualities integrated doesn't necessarily mean that you can't then experience them in the external world if you are heterosexually orientated, right? It doesn't mean that. What it actually means is that you are choosing to value your experience of life so highly. You might choose to integrate those masculine principles so that you can build a business, so that you can be the CEO of an organization. You could do that, but you could also do it just so that you have precise and pristine expectations and boundaries in getting your children to school and having lunches made and having the house the way that you desire it to be, and the friendships the way you desire it to be, and the sex life that you desire it to be. There's so many ways that they can be integrated to create a really rich and beautiful life. And what I have seen is that as women that I've coached have integrated the masculine qualities, they have always called in higher matches of the external masculine if they haven't been partnered. And for people who have been partnered, that their experience of that partnership has elevated mold into something even more beautiful and more special, because they're not constantly outsourcing, which means that their external masculine can really sit in their purity without being like sucked from, basically.
Beautiful. And now, when we talk about eroticism, I know that you've got this beautiful film festival. We'll have to talk about that in a moment too. But, people think about eroticism and sensuality, sexuality, and they think, this doesn't have any place in the workplace. Like, I need to check my sensuality at the door when I enter into an office, or if I'm, on with a bunch of colleagues. So what would be your response to somebody who thinks that way?
It's a good question. There are places where it's not appropriate, actually. That's just true. And, if you're questioning whether something is appropriate or not, you can start to flip between, well, I have a right to express my sensuality wherever I want. For me, that's a shadow of, in all likelihood, the feminine entitlement to be whoever she wants to be, wherever she wants to be it. But when your sexuality and your sensuality is integrated, it just doesn't need to be everywhere. It just doesn't. There are places where it's appropriate with your partner, with friends, out in different adult places and landscapes. And then there are places where it doesn't need to be there. It doesn't mean that you're then cutting it out. But if you're at a, 5-year-old's children party and you really feel the need to express your sensuality, then I think there's a problem. And the problem is that the sensuality or the sexuality isn't actually integrated, because it's actually not an appropriate space to bring through that type of energy. Right. And that's different. Needing to express your sexuality is very different to having levels of comfortability with your own sexuality. So you can still experience yourself as a sensual person at all times without having to bring that energy overtly into a space.
Yeah. Just like we are all multifaceted beings, life and its manifestations do have facets. And so, creating a space and a place for ideal energy to shine and thrive, I think might be the answer. And when you were just making that statement about, well, I should be able to excel, reminded me again of that immature feminine potentially.
Yeah.
One that just feels very entitled and should be able to self-express no matter who, what, where, or when they wish to. Yeah. Thanksgiving dinner table might not be quite right over here in America. Maybe over in Australia, you've got other kinds of holidays and such. Now, getting back to the fact that you're a mom and I'm a mom, we know like once you have a child, life changes. Your life is forever changed. You're pretty much reborn and you're learning life all over again. And so one thing that happens is your libido can plummet, man, when you've got nappies to change and you've got kids to get to school and you're putting other people first. Like the thing that I thought was very amusing that you mentioned is like reclaiming the MILF, which I think is absolutely genius. So what would you say are some ways that mothers can get their sexy back?
Oh, well, one of the ways that I like to work is actually find like social media a place of deep inspiration for this, because there are some really hot celebrities who embody the MILF archetype, like to the most gorgeous level. And one of them is Kim Kardashian.
Absolutely.
Right. There is nothing that woman does that is not hot. And the whole Kardashian kind of Jenner clan sell sex. They sell it everywhere, and they are parents
power.
as well. Yeah, and power, and they're financially very successful and all sorts of other things. So I think if you're struggling to reconnect your sexuality, if social media is supportive, and it might not be, then curating the feed as like a mood board or an inspiration board, and then starting to find ways to incorporate that. And it could be through doing your hair a particular way, or just putting on a little bit of makeup if that's what makes you feel good, or particular clothes. So there's kind of those external ways that we can start to support the feminine reemergence, the sensual reemergence. And the external ways for the feminine is important, because one of the gifts of the feminine is adornment, creating the beautiful crowns and the hair, and it's not superficial, it's just part of the way that the feminine expresses herself. So there's that way. And the other way is to step into your masculine and actively create times, places, and spaces where you get to be with yourself. And that could look like a bath. for 20 minutes. It could look like taking half an hour to lay on your bed and just hold your heart. Usually when these sorts of practices start out, it's not always that pleasurable. Usually there's a lot of emotion to be released. There can be tears, there can be a lot of stuff felt in the heart. The yoni can feel neglected and contracted and sometimes sore or have things that she's still healing from through pregnancy. And I'm not an expert in that, but there are lots of them out there. So there's, coming back and spending time with the body is just so important, and recognizing that you don't have to feel explicitly turned on and aroused and available for sex or intimacy. That's not the measure of whether you're doing it right. I mean, there is no measure of doing it right other than, how do you feel? Is your nervous system at ease? Do you feel rested? Is your belly relaxed? Can you smile and can you laugh? And do you feel connected and supported in your experience of life? So I think that they're probably better places to start, and then you can start to really go down the, well, do I want to self-pleasure? And maybe I use a crystal wand, and maybe I want to lay in the sun naked. And there's so many different ways to start to connect and awaken that level of sexuality and sensuality again. And it will be different for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And the idea of not judging yourself or feeling guilty for taking that time and recognizing and honoring the fact that you deserve it, because look what you've done. You've created a human being. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my motherhood journey began before I came into this kind of sacred sexuality, empowered living. And so, I don't have those reference points as a first mum, but I have them as a mum with a slightly older child. And, those being able to talk about consent, as we talked about at the start, and being able to create space, you just start with the things that you can. You just start where you can with what feels doable. There's no right way. There's no winning,
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Well, Ilsa Fay, it was absolutely a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom. This has been truly extraordinary. And I will put all of your information in the show notes so people know where to find you. Everyone, this is Ilsa Fay. Please find her and follow her. And we wish you a blessed day.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer.